Warriors, hello and welcome to an episode of the Love Your Life Show. I was going to say another awesome episode of the Love Your Life Show, but maybe that's a little presumptive, but that I do very much believe in this episode is going to help you so much, whether you have kids still at home, you have kids that are in the boomerang stage or college coming home at times for vacations, or your kids have fully launched, or you don't have kids and you have parents that you're in relationship with. I have a awesome expert on the show. Dr. Burns has spoken and helped thousands of people, parents and children, in their relationships with their parental relationships. He is an author and executive coach, an executive director, of the Homeward Center for Youth and Family at Azusa Pacific University. He helps us parents in all sorts of ways, in our marriage, in our children relationships. It's just, I don't even know how to do this justice, so just keep listening. He is awesome. I have links in the show notes as to where to find and follow Dr. Burns and let him know that his time here on the Love Your Life show was well spent. You will get something out of this show, and I would love it if you head afterwards to Instagram and let me know your big takeaways. This episode helped me a lot. Dr. Burns's work helps me a lot, and I can't wait for you to listen in. Let's go, Warriors. All right, and welcome, Dr. Burns, to the Love Your Life shows. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your time today.
Susie, good to be with you. By the way, I just listened to one of your podcasts a moment ago, and I loved it. And I've become a fan. So
well, that's good to hear.
Great stuff.
Wow, you're like, it was horrendous. No.
Yeah.
I'm so really glad. Fun. I'm very glad.
Lots of energy, great stuff on teens. You were actually talking about teens, and it was really good.
Yes, that is. I got my start with my master's of education and teaching in high school. So it is interesting how our paths lay out. And I am, as we were speaking briefly before we started recording, I am really hoping to help parents and people in all stages of their empty nesting and also life, in terms of, like, we have kids at home, maybe they're still in our house and they're whatever age before age 18, or they've gone to college and they're sort of coming back for summers, or they're done, they've launched, they haven't done the boomerang yet, and they're off and about. So I've got a big job, but I think we're up to it.
we are up to it. And it is true that even the ones who don't have people who aren't in the empty nest yet, they need to be thinking about it, because it comes as a shock to so many people. Yes.
And I guess that's where I wanted to start with the sort of on the runway, because there is, that listener whose kids are, maybe in grades 9, 10, or 11, and they're noticing that they're starting to worry and starting to think of, like, what will this be like? What advice do you have for them in the lead up? Are there things that
I actually do. I don't think that's so bad. You can't worry too much, but I think it's actually good to start getting your kids ready, because they don't know how to be an adult. So you've got to give them the passport to adulthood eventually. And you don't do that at 18, 19, 20. You actually do it a little younger, where you begin to become more of a consultant. Most of their day-to-day decisions are done, in those late teens. The bottom line is to become a responsible adult, these kids. So you get thinking, but then at the same time, what I found when I wrote the book called Finding Joy in the Empty Nest, what I found was that, parents literally did what Kathy and I did. We dropped our youngest daughter off, Heidi, at school, and we started driving. And we went, what have we done? We hadn't even talked about it. So Kathy has a tear. We're driving in real quiet. And I said, do you want to, our daughter was in Central California, which is a beautiful area. And we're driving down towards Santa Barbara. And I said, do you want to go stop for lunch? And she goes, no, I'm good. I said, you okay? She goes, I think so. We come home to a quiet house, and we had not prepared. And I find a lot of people go through what we call the empty nest syndrome, because they haven't prepared. And frankly, I speak on marriage. I write on marriage. I write on parenting. But for us, I think we buried some things, especially in those late teen years. We were so busy with our kids that we kind of put some stuff under the mat. And of course, there's a lot of single, moms and dads out there too. And it's even sometimes a bigger hit for them. But for us, we actually had to work on some stuff and work on our own spirit. We needed you, because we needed to work on our mind, our body. All of a sudden I went, well, I have time. I could go to the gym. I haven't been to the gym in like 4 years. Right. Yeah. So it was kind of this big aha the people, as we go back to it, the people who kind of think about it younger, when their kids are in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, they're getting prepared both ways. They're preparing the kids a little better than I think we did, and they're preparing, for whatever their life in the empty nest is going to be.
Yeah, I see that also, that the people that sort of move through this with the most ease are the ones who have given it some sort of intentionality ahead of time. And speaking to your roles in these ages and stages, I really do find that the parents that start to shift their mindset from, okay, I need to do everything for my kid, to what's the end game? I want to raise this functioning adult. Well, how do I start to step out of that?
I know.
Place.
And that part's hard, because we've been, for 2 decades, we've been in control, or at least semi-control. By the time they get teens, they're not totally in control, but we've been in control. They've wanted our advice, and now they become young adults, and maybe they're living, maybe it's an empty nest, maybe it's not, but they're like saying, I don't really even want your advice, because if you give me advice, it means you don't trust me. And we're just trying to help out and parent the same way we're doing. We have to reinvent a lot of things in the empty nest, reinvent our parenting, reinvent how we do life. And that's not easy for a lot of people. It doesn't come easy unless they have prepared it. It's easier. Still not perfect, but easy.
Right, but it is that runway. And I guess for that parent that has the kid at home, I'm always talking about like parenting with the medical model. Like initially, 10 and under, we do a lot of it for them. Eventually, we want them to do it all for themselves. And then that middle part, which is a little messy, 10 to 25, it's sort of sharing our brains, but not, we want to get out of doing all the thinking for them and to let them have some of it.
You're exactly right. And it's interesting that you said 25, because I got my PhD in England, and even then they were defining adolescence from 13 to 18, except in England, interesting enough.
That's so funny.
Because they were saying it was like, 10 to 24. Today, if you Google it, that's their definition. So this emerging adulthood becomes very interesting in the empty nest, because they're not always acting like what you and I think are adults, but they're saying, I'm an adult, treat me like an adult. And we're saying, well, we're still paying for your cell phone. We're still paying for school. We're still paying, we're still doing all this. And we are.
Yeah.
But they want more freedom. And really, that's a healthy thing. Even when they make poor choices, experience is a better teacher than advice. So sometimes they have to experience that. And I think that's tough when you're in
so
the
can we just put experience is a better teacher than advice? That's I don't want to skip over that, because that's what we do a lot of talking when we're parents, and I get a lot of questions of like, how do I teach my kid XYZ? And what we need to know is that kids in that stage of development, the words coming out of our mouth, because they're coming out, the unfortunate thing is that because they're coming out of mom or dad's mouth, they are programmed to push against that, versus watching us, what we can model, but then also their experiences and having some of those
and this is the hard thing, Susie, is sometimes the experience is not they didn't make a good choice. And because they didn't make a good choice, hopefully they can learn from that. But again, what we tend to do is try to still hover over them, and that's not going to work. And it's tough. You have to grieve it. It's funny, because empty nest is kind of cool. There's more freedom. There's more time. You get to work on your own, your own life. And yet you got to grieve the fact that you are not in control anymore. And that's not an easy thing.
Well, and I do think, to your point, that if we start that process when they're still in the house, it's stepping out of thinking that we need to do everything for our kids and we're responsible, and letting them have some of those experiences. Because as you say, the experiences sometimes aren't the greatest experiences. What I like to point out is usually the consequences are a lot less if they're in the house. Like if they, don't turn in their bio project, or if they get a bad grade in chemistry, that stinks for sure. But if they're at work and they don't turn in their proposal, they might get fired. Or if they're,
get it. Yes.
So
you're exactly right. So, you mentioned the word 10. So 10, you're still in control, know, and then you move to what I call coaching, because now coaches are still in control. You're the leader. You're kind of saying, now you're in charge, you're now go that way. You can put them on a timeout. You can do different things when they're in those younger teen years, but then you move to consulting, and then your goal is to move to care. And care means, like, I realized, funny enough, today, I have all daughters, but 2 of my 3 daughters, who are in their 30s, called me as kind of a mentor. And I went, gosh, they don't know what they did to my life, because Dad, what would you do in this situation? Two of them did it. And
That's the
that means
greatest, right?
we made the move, because I would say, especially during those early teen years, or early 20 somethings, when they were still in college and they were still trying to make money and figure out things, you know, I kept butting in because I wanted to fix it for them. And they didn't appreciate that. I thought they should. And periodically they'd come back and, can you fix it here, Dad? I need money or whatever.
Right.
But it really is important for us to have that end goal in mind. And, so the younger, I really appreciate, very few people talk about this, but, when your kids are still in the house, that's when you prepare for the empty nest.
Yes. And that is just for parents to step back and manage their own anxiety and worry over whatever their kid is going through, and getting, some guidance from you or Homeward Bound or from me, all the things that we do, so that we can manage ourselves and let our kids have the experiences. One thing I just want to touch on is, you said we then move to a consultant. And one thing with a consultant is that we have to be consulted. So a lot of what us helicopter parents are doing is giving advice, unsolicited advice. And I think it was in one of your books about how the kid's brain, but I also sometimes think my brain takes in unsolicited advice as criticism. That it's totally. And that's that, again, keeping our mind on the end game. What do we want? You said moving to this caring place. Like, ultimately, I want to have a connected relationship with my funds. And giving unsolicited advice that comes off as criticism to them.
No.
I might in that moment think this is what they need, but ultimately it's with stepping back and landing the helicopter.
And what they hear from us when we do that, and by the way, you're in Australia and I'm in California, but the scar on my tongue from biting my tongue because I want to give advice, is terrible, but it's ugly. But the point that I'm saying here is that they see it as not trusting them or not thinking they're all grown up when we do that. And we're just trying to help. We've been helping for those 2 decades. My goodness. We'll keep on doing this, and they make a change whether we know it or not. So this is where we have to just be quiet and actually change the relationship, even though honestly, I think our intentions are good. I think usually we really have good motives, but they don't see it that way. So we've got to sometimes step into their world and understand that. And and then you build a relationship that becomes, it's not peer-peer. It's never peer-peer because your mom, your dad. But it is more of a peer type of a relationship. With our girls, I noticed Kathy, my wife, with our youngest yesterday, she they went out for sushi at lunch, and then they were holding the baby because we have a 3-month-old grandchild, and then they went for a walk, and they did all this, and both of them had a wonderful time. Well, they were almost like what you do with friends, not, and that was beautiful.
Yes. It is just reframing how we view our role. And as you say, like, we have different roles as a parent. And when they are 10 and younger, we literally do have to be the one that's in control. And whether they want to hold our hand crossing the street or not doesn't matter. Like, and we don't want them to be doing the thinking skills on their own there. We're like, you might think, but we sort of force that. But then we need to move more into this.
Sure. No, you're singing my song. Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, and again, at that age, you are going to hold their hand, but you may let them wear an outfit that you don't think was the best outfit, but you're beginning to allow them, because again, the bottom line is them moving from dependence on you to independence. And that is not an easy thing.
Yes, no, it's not. And also
harder on the parents sometimes than the kids.
And I think for the parents, like, there's a lot that comes up. I'm always saying parenting is the biggest self-development experience. There's a lot that comes up, like, when we're triggered. That's what I'm saying to parents. Like, if it triggers you, it's about you. And maybe our kids' outfit is, we're concerned what the other adults are going to think. It's like, okay, again, let's bring it back to the kid. And so I don't want to skate over something you said earlier about how when the kids are, in that stage of preteen, teen, before they leave for college, that can be a time, certainly we're talking about the tactics in the relationship with the teenager, and that we want them to have more consequences and hold back, get better sort of restraint from giving automatic feedback that is viewed as criticism. In the part with ourselves, keeping the focus on ourselves, it's a great time to, what I heard you say, take care and look at yourself, your marriage, your gym routines, your eating, and because that's what the kids are paying attention to too. When we're launching an adult, I hear so many parents are like, how do I teach them to eat well? I'm like, well, what are you showing them? Or they say,
Exactly.
how do I teach them not to gossip about their friends? I'm like, well, what do you do when you come home from a book club, or like, are you just going to, that's what they're
Oh,
paying
no,
attention to. So could you
no,
speak a
no.
little to that?
Yeah, well, I really, we sometimes as parents, we've been somehow in our mindset has been, we don't take care of ourselves. We put the kids ahead of us, and and so now we have a child-focused marriage. So
Mm,
that's not going good for the marriage. And we're not doing self-care. We're not taking care of ourselves. What you just said was so profound, because the very best thing we can do for our kids is to make sure, if we're married, work on
mhm.
our marriage. If we're people who want our kids to eat well, handle their finances well, be the role model. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what we've got to do. And yet a lot of times we're so busy, doing something else. I just find that the best thing to do is to make sure that we, take care of us. That doesn't mean that we're not going to be serving our kids. It doesn't mean that if we're
Right.
in a marriage that we're not. We just simply have to make sure that we're in a good place. And is it easy to, I mean, is it easy? No, it's not. It's complicated to do all that juggling. But the people who do that well, I think they have the end results is that their kids are more secure, their
Mhm.
kids are happier, their kids move into adulthood easier. And sometimes people say, well, what, yeah, but you don't know who I'm married to, or you don't know about my
Right.
kid who's this or that. And I get it,
Yeah.
but the fact is that one person can make a difference within a family. And I think it's the person who's, listening to
In
us
the
right
kitchen.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
honestly, I mean,
really appreciate that. And I want to push back a little on like, is this easy? What I like to point to is it's actually what we're talking about, and I want people to hear this, is that it can be quite simple. A lot of us busy people and moms and
yeah,
dads with full lives are like,
right.
oh, now I need to have a conversation about drugs, and now I have to have a conversation about
Yeah,
finances. And they're sort of adding things to their list.
yeah,
Whereas I'm giving an opportunity, and I hear from you too, is like remove that, because that just sounds like blah, blah, to
yeah,
them. And
right.
instead, it's like, pay attention to your behavior, which actually might be harder. So they're
Yeah,
telling themselves, they're like, I need to have this lecture, but actually watching how, they don't come home from work and say, like, oh my God, I need some wine because I had such a hard day. They're modeling,
yeah,
what are they modeling there? They're not
no,
coming home
exactly.
and saying, I want to have whatever it is. It's like this
Right.
looking at what we're modeling is actually
Yeah,
simpler. It might feel harder
yeah,
in the short term.
yeah. Well, it is simpler. It's not always easy
It's
because,
not
again, we've
easy.
been, well, Kathy and I were raised, both of us were raised in dysfunctional homes. So, they say you either repeat or you
Mhm.
recover. And so about a year into our marriage, we decided that we were going to recover. And it's been one of the
Mm.
best things we could do.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that, that's easy. It just means that, no, if we're going to cover, but what we do realize now is you recover and you change the trajectory of a family for generations.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And in doing
Yeah.
that, then it makes it all worth it. We suffered, a week and a half ago, the whole family was in Hawaii on a vacation. And I was sitting back kind of watching our family, and there was 11 of us there. And Kathy
Mm.
and I were sitting on a chaise at this pool, it's
Yeah.
palm trees, just perfect. And I put my arm around her and I said, uh, it's good. Look at these guys.
Yeah.
It's good. Is it perfect? Would I have chosen this person to marry this person? I probably would have. But
Right.
it's good. The grandkids were good. The family's secure. And I look back just one generation and go, whoa, they were a mess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I appreciate Kathy and Christy had a conflict when she was 17. Christy's our oldest. And I said, no, your mom is the transitional generation. The weight is on her shoulders. So mom started in deficit land. I put my hand over this way. She's
Yeah.
17. She understood the dysfunction of the family. And I said, and mom is the person I've seen grow most of anybody I know, honestly. And I said, so that you get to start someplace in the middle and you can go
Mm.
farther than mom, but she had to bear the pain of
The
dysfunction,
brunt of changing. Yes.
but she had courage to make that change. And Christy, who had been, giving her mom some hassles, she goes, her eyes well up with tears. I wasn't yelling at her,
Yeah.
but she just goes, Dad, you're so right. She goes down. Kathy's still kind of mad at her because they've had this little, tiff. And she hugs Kathy and goes, thank you
Mm.
so much. And Kathy's looking at me like, did you promise Disneyland? I mean, what
Like,
is
what just
this?
happened?
Yeah.
Yes.
But the point being is that my girls understood that Kathy took that hit so that they could be better off.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about emotional, spiritual, physical,
Yes.
that's the thing. And she's modeled that well. And
Right.
even when she's made a mistake, as we all do, she's not afraid to say to the kids, you know what, that was all about me, and I'm so sorry. That wasn't
Right.
about you. And boom, that's teaching those kids how to model integrity.
Yes, I used to have a sign in my house. I think we have a very similar past. I used to have a sign in my house that said the dysfunction stops here. And
I love
and
that.
so I absolutely, listeners
Yeah,
of this show, or if this is the first time they're listening, we've talked about sort of defining what we're
yeah,
calling easy and hard, in sort of the
yeah,
like thinking that something is hard, but it's a
yeah.
short-term hard for long-term gain. So, making the
So
short-term
good.
decision to have the discussion with your kids about
Yeah,
boundaries, or to do, you get then long-term ease. But what we're often doing is telling ourselves it's too hard, taking the short-term ease, and then we
right.
have, even just that, like the repair, having a conversation
Yeah,
afterwards can feel really hard. And
yeah.
yet, long term, it's ease. So that's
It's
when
great. Yeah,
parents, bring it sort of back to the parent, to the kids in the house, it
yeah.
will feel challenging and hard to their nervous system because they're doing something different.
Right.
If they're letting their kid make decisions about when to turn in the biology homework, or, some of the
No,
more
it's so
quote
no,
unquote trivial things, or
yeah,
manage
you're
their
right.
own. Yeah. And
Yeah,
yet
and
long
sometimes you just have to
term.
do it. Wake up in the morning and you repeat. It doesn't sound all that exciting, but
Yeah.
I was talking to a group of moms today. I'm a speaker, and I was speaking at this event, and I said, how many of you have seen Reeker? I don't even know if it's Reacher or Reeker, but it's a television show that's kind of running crazy here in the United States. And the guy really is a hunk. I mean, I'm just telling you,
Yeah.
every female goes, oh my gosh.
You have
So he has
appreciation. Right.
he has a 12 pack instead of a 6 pack. So you get who I'm talking about, not who I am. And the interviewer said, what is it like to, how to be in this kind of shape? And he said, well, after 35 years of working 40 minutes a day to make my stomach look like this, it feels pretty doggone good. And what he was saying
Exactly.
was, I loved it, because what he was saying was, it's only 40 minutes, but I work 40 minutes most days of the week. And
Yeah.
that's why I've got, that going. Well, in some ways it is that way with our lifestyle, our relationships, definitely our
Mhm.
parenting, that you just got, you wake up, you got kind of beat up a little bit by your kids this
Yeah.
hour, but you just wake up and you do the same thing, and the next day better, and the next
Yeah.
day it gets a little better, and it gets a little better, and then in the empty nest you have the ability to do what Kathy and I did last week, like I said, and went, hey, life's going okay. It's not
Yeah.
perfect, but it's going
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it is. It's those compounding actions that continue, sort of
Love
overall
that.
parenting and trying. We're going to make mistakes. Like, it's possible this man has missed an ab day, but then you just get
Yeah,
back on and you're like, overall, where is our ship heading? Like, where are
yeah,
we going? And to keep an eye on that, as you say, like giving our kids a passport to life. Could you speak a
yeah.
little more to
Yeah.
that?
Well, when I talk to parents who have adult children, meaning at 18 or so, even though their
Right.
kids are saying I'm adults, we're saying, are you really?
Right.
Um, I always say, hey, principle number one, you're fired. And they go, what? I go, you're fired as a day-to-day parent. You're not fired as a parent. You're still mom. You're still dad.
Yeah.
But you're fired as a day-to-day parent. So when you reinvent the relationship, you have to realize that your 20-something doesn't know how to be an adult. They've never been an adult. And we don't know how to be parents of an
Yeah.
adult. So we're going to learn this together, and we're going to kind of bump into each other, and we're going to have some things. But again, since the goal is, as we said, very clearly to become responsible adults, we're going to help them do that. And, we'll go 3 steps forward and a step back periodically.
Yeah.
But you're fired. So the passport to adulthood, they're waiting for you to give them that passport.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the main job descriptions of a person going into the either empty nest or just having adult children, is handing them the passport.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate, because your book, everyone should get, this book, Finding Joy in Everyday Life, and then also the adult children book, Doing Life with Your Adult Children, which will, if people are interested in this topic, they will adore both of these books. And you do go through, 5 questions that are super helpful. It is a great resource for empty nesting and just keeping in touch with ourselves. Are we giving them a passport? Are we creating dependency? All of that.
Right.
That said, moving on to the person who is in the empty nest stage, I just like how you address that this is hard, and it is, you know, you at some point quoted how this is sort of like a necessary part of our job description. And that's something that, you know, I had probably a 6-year period where I had still one kid living at home full-time under my care, some in college,
Yeah,
some, and now all of mine are out of my house.
yeah,
And I have to constantly remind myself, and it's been really helpful to listen to people like you, that like I'm not doing anything quote unquote wrong. My grief and my, like, at times it literally
yeah,
feels like my heart is breaking,
right.
is part of the parent journey, unfortunately. Can you speak a bit to that?
Yeah. Well, you know what, when we started, just before I write the book, I usually speak to hundreds of people, and we do it with focus groups. Sometimes we'll bring 20 at a time. And it was interesting with the empty nest because every one we did, and we talked to hundreds. This was during I wrote that book. My first studies, I should say, was kind of during the pandemic, so you know nobody could talk in person and all this.
Right.
People, one of the guys who was helping me with this said, "Do you realize that somebody cried in every one of the focus groups?" And I wasn't doing therapy; I was just asking them,
Wow.
"What's it like?" Well, it was because it was hard, and they were grieving, and and in some ways they're like, what do I do with the rest of my life? The
Mm-hmm.
amount of people, because I speak on this a lot, Susie, who say to me, what am I supposed to do now? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I had a job description. It was take care of these kids, have a
Mm-hmm.
job. Most of them had a job too. You know, I had my job, I was taking care of the kids and all this. And now I'm looking at an empty house, and I'm looking at a husband who's like still working like crazy, and he doesn't seem to hardly
Mm-hmm.
skip a beat. Not all husbands are like that, I understand.
Right.
But what do I do now with my life? And so in
Mm-hmm.
some ways, this is our chance to reinvent. And sometimes, like I know a woman who uh, I think she was about, her kids were in their mid 20s, and she said, you know, I've always wanted to be a marriage and family counselor.
Mm.
And she went back to school. I mean, she
Yeah.
went full time. She got straight A's because that's what
Of
happens when
course.
you know.
Right.
So
Yeah.
she got straight A's, and now she's a person that here at Homeward we send people to her because she's
Mm-hmm.
amazing, especially
Mm-hmm.
with you know other women who are going through the empty nest stuff, or men, but mainly women. And you know, that had been a dream of hers. She had
Mm-hmm.
put that off. She had
Yeah.
sacrificed a lot. So how cool for her to find meaning in her vocation.
Mm-hmm.
Now other people say, I have always wanted to be in a you know in a gym, and I just haven't had the time to go get in shape. So what they do is they go sign up for the gym, and they go, you know, mornings were crazy because it was crazy
Yeah.
with the kids or whatever it might be, or afternoons when they came back from work or whatever. Now they can go to the gym. So
Yeah.
they can get in better shape. They can eat better, you know, on and on and on. So they just do it. So I'm impressed with the people who don't just sit around and wait for something to happen, but actually make something happen,
Mm-hmm.
make those dreams happen. You know,
Yeah.
I call it a dream list. I think couples, even who are married, doesn't have to be just married couples, but you know, who kind of write a dream list. And it doesn't have to be, we want to go to, you know, we live here in California and we've got to go see Sydney. It could be,
Right.
we want to go on a camping trip, or we want to, you know, take up pickleball, or we want
Mm-hmm.
to, you know, join a group of other people who are going through or in the same age thing, whatever it is.
For
But
sure.
those are the people who are doing better. The people who are still struggling are the ones who can't get up off the couch,
Mm-hmm.
or are saying, you know, the kids aren't calling.
Yeah.
Why don't the kids call? Why don't
I
the
was
kids
going to say
call?
that part too. Like, so I just want to highlight for listeners that we're going to have both experiences at the same time.
Yeah,
If, you know, if you're following Dr. Burns, where like the kids are still in the house and you're trying to pay attention to yourself and your
yeah,
interests, and starting to sort of get
yeah,
on the runway for that, knowing that
right,
ahead of you, there will be, even though it feels like the days are so long, there will
yeah,
be a period when they're not in the house. So what can you do? And maybe, you know, you start a new business, or you start going back to the gym, you
yeah,
start these things.
right,
And it is still, as we change our role, it is still going to feel hard, especially as you spoke to that part of the mom versus the dad and
yeah,
our identity.
yeah,
When we're really linking ourselves as a mom, and our
yeah,
job is to
yes,
care for that kid, that can feel really hard. And
yeah.
that,
Wait, yeah, you're right. And you know, my wife, Kathy, she talks a lot about that for her own experience. So I call her, I say, you are the sun. You had
mm,
3 planets going around the sun, and then a 4th planet in this husband at home anyway. And all of a sudden, there's no planets,
Mhm.
and you're just kind of out there. And so for her, it was much tougher. She felt some anxiety and some depression and things like that. Not intense, because that's not
Right.
her, but she felt some of that. You know what? And I said, well, I don't have the empty nest syndrome. And
Right.
then, later on, I thought, wait, I go to work an hour early, I stay at work an hour later. I'm just pouring my
Mhm.
grief into my work, and neither was healthy. So what Kathy
Right.
was going through, she had to kind of go through her grief. She was probably healthier than me. And then with me, I just like, hey,
Right.
kids aren't there. I'll go to work at 7 instead of at
Mhm.
8,
Right.
and I'll stay till 6. Kathy's going to be busy doing something else, so I'll just stay later. Not healthy.
Right. And that's the part I want to bring focus to, is that like, if we can accept that this grieving is going to be there and sort of look at it and be like, okay, and how do
Yeah.
I support myself when
Yeah.
I'm grieving? And maybe
Yeah.
go to a coach or do some, do
Yeah.
something that way. It
Yeah.
can be very helpful versus going into it blindly,
Yeah.
feeling the grief, but in that feeling state, then
Yeah.
using work to distract ourselves, or using
Yeah.
calling our, thinking that we need to now call I heard a study by the woman who wrote How to Raise an Adult, and how she said like college professors now and deans are getting way more calls from parents than they ever had before, because those helicopter
Right.
parents have not landed the friggin' helicopter.
No,
And so
no.
we can get distracted in our emotional state and just shift
Right.
from hyper focusing when they were at home to hyper focusing when they're at
Right.
college, or even hyper focusing maybe on our adult parents. And what your
Yeah.
work lends to is just slowing down a little, pausing, and being a little more intentional of, let's build up your life. What life do you want to live? While at the
Right.
same time, yes, this is hard because you're changing roles. You are
Yeah.
no longer supposed to
Yeah.
be involved in your kids' everyday life anymore. And
No.
that's the nature of parenthood.
No, it's the irony that
Yes.
parents are calling the pediatrician for the 22-year-old, and why the pediatrician, I'm not sure, and making an appointment, or the dentist, or the college professor. I have a friend who is the president of a university. He's one of my best friends, and he got a call from a woman and said, hey, I have a son who, he's a good student and he got a D on his paper, business, and I want you to go talk to the
Oh
professor.
my
And
goodness.
so he said, I don't know why I did this, but I said, okay, I'll go talk to the professor. The professor said, well, the kid's smart. He just had a bad paper. So my friend calls her back up and she says, I am so offended. I wrote that paper. I have an MBA from Stanford University, and I wrote his paper, and that professor gave me a D. Well,
You're like,
on
there are
several
so many
levels,
problems here. I don't even
right. But
start.
31% of parents have called on their younger kids, have called the work and said,
Wow.
Johnny's not coming to work today. What? 31%.
No.
That's nuts.
Oh, I don't want to.
So,
Yeah.
so again, we don't want to be those people.
No,
And
we
yet,
want to back out. And I guess one of the things I heard you say, and one of the most helpful muscles we can build in the empty nest, is the muscle of restraint, and
yes,
really
so good.
moving,
Oh,
moving back from that, like being intrusive and being involved in everything they're doing, whether it's at work or,
yeah.
certainly when
And some of us just need to go get a life. And
yeah.
I think the people who go and get a life, like
Mhm.
I would say that some of the people who I see healthy, it's moms and dads who are with other people in the same lifestyle, meaning the same age development and whatnot with their kids, and they're able to kind of bounce that off. So all of a sudden they have friends. I mean, somebody in Empty Nest, I quoted a woman who said to me, and it was so neat, she was so positive, she said, I didn't know my best friends were going to come after I was 50. Well, what
Mm,
a great thing. That means she went and found some best friends.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
how good for her.
Right.
That makes her
And talk about modeling. Because I
makes her
think,
a better, better
again,
mom. Yeah.
right, some of what we've done is sort of model this adulthood for kids, where we're like, go do this and go do that, and then get this high powered job. And kids are like, why? So I can be as miserable as you intend.
Hey, you're
It's
so
like,
right.
right. And just to model like this, midlife reinvention and all of that. And
Yeah.
I really, when you say get a life, that might sound harsh to people. And if it sounds harsh, I just want them to breathe through it, because that's what
Right.
we're saying. And that's the transition that has to
Right.
happen, that when they're under 10, we really are focused. We know everything about them. We know when they've had
Sure.
bowel movements. We know when they've had a friend breakup.
Right. So
And
good.
then we need to start from that age
Yeah.
forward
Yeah.
to spend less time in our head thinking about
Yeah.
how they're living their life, and more
Yeah.
time thinking about how we're living
No,
our life and sort of.
that's so good. And then you get to a stage where you're the sandwich, and then you know when your parents are having their bowel movements because they're
Yes.
calling you. And they become the 10-year-olds. You're like, what happened here?
What is happening? Yes.
That's
So
another conversation
that's
someday. But it
another
really
whole
is.
conversation.
As soon as you said it, I thought, yeah. And then the parents give you way too much information about their
Yeah.
medical, stories or whatever. That's good.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
all of this, whether it's the parents or the kids,
Yeah.
we've been trained a lot to
Right.
be selfless and do
Yeah.
what the kids need or what
Right.
our parents need.
Right.
What I'm hearing is to bring some focus back to us and what we need, because if we're attuned to that, we're going to be better for everyone.
Yeah.
And
No, yeah, you're right.
sort of that
We begin, what I say, and I said it in that book, but what I say is, when you're talking about games, so games are won in the second half, not in the first half. And in the first half, life is frenetic. I mean, it's just hard. You're busy, and it's hard to all of a sudden do some of the things that you teach on, or some of the things I'm trying to teach on. But in the second half, when we can focus on our own self, own soul, own issues, because we do have more time. And when we do that, we're gonna, people go into the empty nest, you're gonna fill it with stuff. But why not declutter some of it first, and then fill it with some better stuff?
Fill it intentionally.
Like I have a chapter in there on finishing well, and I'm not talking about people who are 89 years old and on their last tooth or something. Right. I'm talking about people should be talking about finishing well when they're here in the United States it's 48 when people go into the empty nest. That was not our case. We were a lot older. But with that, that's when you should be thinking about how you finish well. Well, how do you finish well physically? How do you finish well relationally? How do you finish well with your kids? How do you finish well, with your own spirit, your own soul? I mean, how do you do that? Well, it means you got to put some energy into it.
Some thought into it, and they're in the right place listening to the Love Your Life show, because that's what I'm talking about, how to love your life, not how to set your kids up or your parents.
No, exactly. And it's possible you could, what you're talking about is in a really neat way. There's some lower shelf things that you can make a tweak. You don't have to change your whole life.
Yes.
You can just make some tweaks and make it better. And today we're so lucky because, my parents had no resources. Like they didn't have podcasts. They didn't have the kind of books that we have now. We have access to health, mental health. We have access to spiritual health. We have access to physical health. So much easier. I mean, I go to a personal trainer, and this guy's like 32 years old, and I'm laughing because he goes, "You're my mentor." And I'm going, "Oh no, you're my mentor, and you're kicking my rear right now because you're telling me to do this thing." But so my parents didn't do that. They didn't even think about it. But I went, wait, it's time for me to, get myself in better shape. I played sports in college and things like that. And then I kind of go, what happened to me? So I'm letting a 32-year-old, kick my rear. And it's been really, really good.
Yeah. Any day is a good day to start over and to try little tweaks to what you're saying. Yeah. I really appreciate that. Well, thank you very much, because you're giving many of us tools to live a life they love. And, whether our kids are at home or not, is a factor in our lives, but we get to take responsibility for the life we're living. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love what you're doing, and I'm so grateful that there's a whole bunch of people who are being helped by your words and by your lifestyle and by what you're saying. Way to go.
Really Thank you very much. And yours too. I will put all links for because your website is quite robust with a lot of good information for people to get. I really encourage, I'll put links to the books in the show notes. And I'm just so appreciative of your time, Dr. Burns, and the message you're sending out there to just empower all of us parents to live our best life.
Yay, Susie. You're doing great. Thank you.
Thank you.